Midlife weight gain, difficulty losing weight, struggling with the waist gain. That's weight around the middle where you may never have had it accumulating there before. Dealing with fatigue and decrease in energy, aches and pains, all those symptoms that related to aging have to do with metabolic dysfunction. Metabolic, what's going on with our metabolism? How are we functioning? How are we optimizing our health and our longevity? Decreasing inflammation, improving our sense of well being, able to release toxic fat and live our best life. Well, today on the Girlfriend Doctor Show, I am bringing a guest that I always enjoy talking to, and this is Ben Azadi, the Ben Azadi. And he has been a friend and he has been a leader in the keto space and the wellness space. He's a very down to earth guy who has dug in, really transformed his life, healed himself. Well, I'll let him tell you the story. And he's coming out with a new book called Metabolic Freedom. So we've got a lot to share today that I know that you're going to resonate with and enjoy. So join me in welcoming the Ben Azadi. Welcome, Ben. Welcome back to the Girlfriend Doctor Show.
I'm excited to be here. Love your work. And round two, it's going to be our best conversation yet.
I know, and I'm really excited about your book. I mean, let's talk metabolic freedom. Wow. I mean, that's like lifting the weight of many, many stones off our shoulders. So tell us about how you got to this point and metabolic freedom. It sounds so good.
It does, right? I think that's something we all desire. I'm somebody who did not have metabolic freedom for 20 plus years. I was in a metabolic prison where I was obese physically, obese mentally, sugar addiction, video game addiction, drug addiction, followed a standard American diet, ate a lot of fast food, inflammatory foods, and I lived it myself. And I was a young man dealing with high blood pressure, prediabetes, erectile dysfunction, lack of purpose and depression. And it was so severe, the depression, that it led to suicidal thoughts. And I explored suicide. And every time I did, kept thinking about my mom. And I didn't want to do that to my mom. I didn't want her to suffer. So it stopped me. And it really forced me to take responsibility and figure things out. And I'm happy to say that I did. I started to actually move my body, eat whole foods. And that was about 17 years ago. I lost a ton of weight, went from being metabolically unhealthy to metabolically fit. And ever since then, I've been in the space here for 17 years, studying health and nutrition, metabolic health. And you teach this so well. We see so many people that are unhealthy, dealing with so many symptoms, men and women. And the studies are pretty crazy when it comes to the lack of health in the United States. There were three key studies that I put in the book, Metabolic Freedom. The first study, and it was a study from 2016. It was a Mayo Clinic study, which set out to determine how many Americans live what they consider an active, healthy, fit lifestyle. And they based it off of four criterias. The first criteria was that, number one, they don't smoke cigarettes. The second criteria was that if they're a female, they have a body fat percentage under 30%. And if they're a male, a body fat percentage under 20%. The third criteria was that they ate what they considered a healthy diet, which was just a minimally processed diet. And the fourth criteria was that they exercised for 150 minutes per week total, vigorous or moderate exercise. At the conclusion of the study, it showed that only 2.7% of Americans fit that percentage, those criteria. That's it, right? And that was before COVID. That was before all the lockdowns. And it's probably gotten worse. And we know
Right.
that in 2018, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill showed about 88% of American adults are unhealthy. And then more recent studies show it's closer to 93%. So they're living that metabolic prison that I did. So I wanted to write this book and give the steps. Well, first of all, give the causes. Here's why we have metabolic dysfunction. Here are the solutions. And then here's a 30-day plan to now implement what you've just learned.
Excellent. And I think that's so true. I mean, there's so many studies that look at, okay, even within these markers, what percentage is healthy, and looking at blood pressure markers, cholesterol markers, hemoglobin, even pre-diabetic numbers, like up to, I think it was 5.5 or something with a hemoglobin A1C. but less than 12% of Americans with those looking at those standards in that study were considered to be healthy, and that's not optimum. So when you say metabolic prison, explain that.
Yeah, the first thought that will come to mind, as it just did right now when I hear that, what you just said is you're stuck burning sugar. You're what's called a sugar burner. And our metabolism is not designed to burn only sugar. There's nothing wrong with burning sugar and glucose. We could use those terms interchangeably. But when you're only burning sugar and glucose, you're in a metabolic prison because then you are relying on food for energy. You're relying on food for metabolism, and it'll age you fast. It'll create weight gain, insulin resistance, prediabetes, increased chances of cancer, heart disease, autoimmune. I could go on and on and on. So that is a metabolic prison where you cannot travel on a road trip or go to the airport and fly without having your snacks and food readily available. You get hangry when you go more than 3 or 4 hours without food, hungry and angry. You've become really unpleasant and you're not shining as your true personality. You're not there for your family. You're not there for your coworkers. You're not productive unless you get a snack. So the first step is to go from burning sugar to burning fat. Our metabolism is designed to go back and forth, but for many people, the first step is to shift from burning sugar to burning fat because being a sugar burner is a metabolic prison.
I love that phrasing of it. And that's so true. And then your first book was Flex, Metabolic Flex.
Keto flex. Yeah,
Keto
similar.
flex.
Yeah.
Keto flex. That's whole concept, right? Because you want to
Yes.
be able to go back and forth. And, I always say 10% fasting, 10% feasting, 80% keto-green. That concept of low
I love it.
carbohydrate really try to shift, and especially for women midlife and beyond, but really all ages. It's that shift and that ability to empower our body. So let's talk about that shift into burning ketones and
Yeah.
how that can help with, because again, there's the right way and there's the wrong way to keto, right? So let's talk about it, especially from a post midlife woman's perspective. Ben, help me go
Abs-
there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that 10-10-80 approach. So 10% feast, 10% fast, and then 80% keto green. Beautiful. Amazing. That's perfect. Um, with the sugar piece, right? Especially as we women enter perimenopause and postmenopause, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Women become more insulin resistant when they're in postmenopause. But the interesting thing about insulin is that there are studies, a Whitehall study too, and several others that I put into the book that show you could have full-blown insulin resistance, in other words, hyperinsulinemia, for on average 6 to 14 years without any of your blood sugars changing or even your A1C changing. It could look perfect. Meanwhile, your insulin is being produced at massive amounts because your body is just trying to do as much as possible to clear that excess glucose out of the bloodstream until it cannot. Until those receptor sites for insulin go deaf to the screams, then there's a dramatic shift in your blood sugars and then you're pre-diabetic, diabetic if you are even testing. And that could happen even more rapidly during the perimenopause, postmenopausal stage because of what happens with the insulin resistant piece. So the most important test, or one of the most important tests to get done is a fasting insulin test, a blood test that looks at your insulin sensitivity or lack thereof. And we want to see that fasting insulin ideally between 3 and 7, but single digits is good. And you also want to be aware that the report that comes back on that fasting insulin test, the reference range is going to be between 3 and 25 or 3 and 28, which
Mhm.
is so wild, Anna, because you could be 17 or 22 and your conventional doctor will say, you're fine. Come back in a year if they even test that, which they probably don't. But that's insulin resistance. So that is a very important test because you won't get the full picture just looking at A1C and blood sugar. And I think this is even more important for the postmenopausal ladies as well.
I agree. I agree. And sometimes, like, too, as a physician, I can be suspicious of it. And they may have, like, a hemoglobin A1C that's within the optimal range, even like 5.3, 5.4, a little bit above where I like to see it. But their fasting insulin can still be in that 7 or below 10 range. And what I have to do, because suspicious, especially in clients with PCOS, is do a fasting insulin to glucose over 2 hours, a 2 hour glucose, oral glucose challenge test, but also looking not just at glucose, but at insulin at the same time. Because you'll see, like, sometimes those clients are keeping these great glucose levels. They're wearing their continuous glucose monitor. I have a Stilo on right now. but their sugars are staying, but you're like, something's going on. They're still gaining at their waistline. They're still doing this. And you do that challenge test and you see that insulin at 2 hours is maybe even 100. I mean, it can be,
Wow.
yeah. So I think so those, but like that, checking that fasting insulin, that's standard on my labs. That's really key. But still, if like we're still not getting where we need to go, there has to be that continued suspicion of insulin resistance or impaired insulin response.
That's good. I love that's kind of like the craft test, right? But it's not as long as like a craft test, and it's brilliant because you're right. You want to look at the postprandial glucose response and just looking at blood sugars. And it's a great idea. You're wearing a CGM. I wear them all the time. I prick my finger all the time. Great idea, but it's not giving you the full picture. But looking at postprandial glucose and postprandial insulin, that is brilliant. I love that you do that.
Yeah. What is the craft test you mentioned?
Oh yeah, so it's an older test from like I think the 70s where Dr. Kraft developed this similar to what you just said where you have them drink I think 70, 80 grams of glucose drink and then you're testing their insulin for I think up to 5 hours post to see really get more of a clear picture if they have insulin resistance. It's called the Kraft assay, I believe it's called.
Wow. Okay.
So you're already doing it. You're brilliant.
Well, we're OB, we do that in pregnancy. We just look at 0 and 2 hours, but I always look at zero. I mean, we look at 0, 1, and 2 for the glucose, but adding in the insulin is game changing. It
Yeah.
really is. It gives you more of the picture. So, Ben, and especially in this midlife, we're seeing the weight gain around the middle without doing anything different. So when we talk about getting this metabolic freedom, we want to look at really improving our metabolism. One way is with that, getting into ketosis. And so let's talk about strategies to help us remove that waist gain.
Yeah, well, no, it's as simple as just eating less and move more. And we don't have to talk more about that. I mean,
Right.
so
Calories in,
ridiculous.
calories
Yeah.
out.
What a
Yeah, that's key.
disservice to people, huh? It's such a disservice.
I
It's
know.
it's
I
it's it's
know.
so calories matter. Don't get me wrong. They're just not the most important thing. Hormones and inflammation are the most important thing. Yeah,
Yes.
enter ketosis, right? Man, I have a whole chapter in Metabolic Freedom about keto and why I believe the 93% of Americans that are metabolically unhealthy, I call them being in a keto deficiency, a fat burning deficiency. Ketones are amazing for slimming that waist and toning and burning belly fat, stubborn fat, because yes, you lower insulin when you eat keto. And insulin is a key hormone that when it's elevated, you are in a fat storage state. It's an energy sensor. And of course, when you eat more carbs, especially processed carbs, you're constantly spiking insulin. When you're snacking, you're spiking insulin. We just talked about insulin. That is going to cause fat storage and create weight loss resistance. So when you eat more protein and fat, like you do with keto, less carbs, and you eliminate snacking, you're lowering insulin. That's one way the body starts to get slimmer and burn body fat. But the second way is there's an upregulation in mitochondrial health, meaning ketones actually signal to the mitochondria to create mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria. And it does this in a beneficial stress, a hormetic stress, where it signals to the mitochondria to create more energy, ATP, and it creates that energy through the increase in mitochondria. So with that increase in energy, there's about a 400% increase in ATP when you're
Mm.
burning ketones versus sugar. There's going to be an increase in your metabolism, your basal metabolic rate because of the increase in energies, meaning you just burned more fat sitting on the couch, not having to count a calorie, excuse me, or cut a calorie. And so lower insulin, increase in energy. And then the third part here is that you significantly lower cell inflammation. So now your fat burning hormones could actually get into the cell, connect to those receptor sites, and tell your cells to burn fat. So it's a trifecta for fat loss. And, for postmenopausal women, and I'm sure you've seen this, Anne, I want to get your feedback here because I've worked with, what's interesting in my academy, my Keto Kamp Academy, about 65% of the members are women and about half of them are postmenopausal. So I have a lot of data, not as much as you, working with postmenopausal ladies. And here's what I've seen. A lot of them struggle with brain fog. Of course, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed, and they're losing their memory, they have brain fog. Ketones are absolutely incredible for those struggling with brain fog because I mentioned the mitochondria. Well, the brain have the highest concentration of mitochondria. There could be up to 2 million mitochondria in a single cell in different regions of the brain. Compare that to other cells that might have hundreds to thousands of mitochondria. The brain is just loaded with it. So ketones benefit the mitochondria the most, and it's found mostly in the brain. So you're going to start to notice that, oh my gosh, the brain fog is going away. I'm just so mentally clear. I have more energy. I'm productive. It's an absolute game changer for anybody struggling with brain fog. And I'm curious, have you seen the same thing with that? Oh my gosh, my brain feels amazing sort of feeling?
Absolutely, because gluconeogenesis in the brain is hormone dependent, estrogen dependent. So postmenopausally, our estrogen levels are lower and we're not even utilizing glucose more. So our brain's starving for fuel. In come ketones, whew, jet fuel to the brain. Absolutely. Absolutely, very physiologic. So, Ben, one of the things that, when we're struggling with this getting into ketosis, sometimes it's a really big challenge. I know for me, when I first started, like in this journey, 2014, into getting into ketosis, and then realizing for me that key part as a woman, especially that alkalinity, greens, healthy component of nutrients and minerals and micronutrients, as well as, you know, vitamin G, as you like to say, for me,
Ah,
that oxytocin, right?
yes.
Which is very alkalinizing.
Oh, the
And so
best.
getting those key parts in, it was literally like 3 days of fasting before I could first get into ketosis. Now it's relatively quicker, easier with diet and my body's more flexible. But then it was like literally I was with stress and everything else, it was really a challenge to get into ketosis. What are you finding? What are you seeing? What's some shortcuts?
Yeah, yeah,
What I
yeah.
always want to know.
Yeah, now you're very metabolically flexible. You're metabolically free, so it's easy for you to just shift back and forth from sugar, fat, sugar, fat. I'm the same way, but it wasn't that way for a very long time. Yeah, there's some things you can do. I like the idea of first getting fat adapted before practicing too much fasting. Now, some people
Yeah.
could do what you did and just go into a 3-day fast and force ketones to get produced. The approach I have in the book in the 30-day plan is to first gradually decrease carbs, increase fats and electrolytes, and shift into a fat burning mode within 7 days or so. But there's some things you can do. Caprylic acid, which is C8, it's an MCT oil or MCT fat, medium chain triglyceride. Um, the research shows the most promising for C8 in terms of ketone production. So adding a scoop of MCT C8 into your coffee or tea or powder into your coffee and tea, great way to boost ketone production. So I'd recommend that. Also, your sleep plays a vital role here. There's a whole chapter on sleep and circadian rhythm in the book. When you're not getting quality sleep, of course, you're going to have higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. Glucose falls, cortisol. You're going to be hungrier. There's an increase in ghrelin, the hunger hormone. You're going to be less satisfied. There's a decrease in the satiety hormone, leptin. So by getting quality sleep, and I know that's more challenging when you're postmenopausal, but getting better sleep will help with regulating glucose because in order for ketones to get produced, we need to keep glucose and insulin low. So sleep will help with that. And then the third part here is actually muscle mass. And of course, I'm not saying to become a bodybuilder, but building lean muscle mass makes you more insulin sensitive. It's kind of like a sponge that absorbs excess glucose. And as a
Hmm.
matter of fact, this is really interesting. I was digging into a lot of the literature on metabolism because I hear people say, "Oh, my metabolism is so slow, I'm 40," or "Oh, I'm 55, my metabolism has dramatically slowed down." And it's because I'm 55 that I'm gaining weight. And they keep blaming their age for their slowdown in the metabolism. And I thought, is there some validity to this or what does the science show? So the research actually shows, and I put studies in the book, that there are no significant changes in the metabolism at all in both men and women until you reach age 60. And then the studies show there's about a 0.7% decrease in the metabolism every year after that point. Sounds like bad news for postmenopausal women, right? But here's the thing, the reason why there's a decrease after age 60 is because of loss of muscle mass. So if you are intentional with building lean muscle mass, eating quality protein, and strength training in your own variation, you could essentially be 85 years old with the metabolism of a 25-year-old if you preserve that muscle mass or build that muscle mass. So to me, that's super exciting.
I always say muscle is magic post-menopause, right?
Oh,
It is magic and it is so key. Okay, so what about the critics? We get critics. Certainly just saying sometimes keto raises some eyebrows, criticisms. Critics of, well, if I have thyroid disease, I can't do keto, or if I have adrenal fatigue, I can't do intermittent fasting or what the situation is. So and you have had thousands, tens of thousands of people in your groups and so interactive in it with, clients and facing these objections or these circumstances. What have you found to be true?
Yeah, that all of that can be true when you do keto the wrong way or do it too aggressively or dogmatically. Me and you are very similar. We look at keto as a tool in the shed, not the only tool in the shed.
Mhm.
It's a very important tool, but for like hypothyroidism, that is a thought that, hey, I have Hashimoto's, I have a slow thyroid. There's no way I could do keto or even fasting. But as a matter of fact, I've used ketosis and fasting responsibly with balancing, with flexing, which is getting out of ketosis and proper refeeding and feasting to get people off Hashimoto's medication or improve their thyroid health, right? So the reason why there's a lot of confusion with the thyroid piece is because the studies show when these hypothyroidism patients go on a low carbohydrate keto diet, we see a reduction in T3. And that might sound like a bad thing, but here's what's happening. You don't need as much T3 because now you have less inflammation, so you're more sensitive to the T3. Now, of course, if you continue to do strict ketosis for 6 months, 12, I mean, there's going to be a reverse effect there, but
Well, that's
that's
because of the
where,
acidity component if you're not monitoring it.
there
I
you
really
go.
think that's the acidity issue that's causing that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you're completely right there. I think that's a big part of it. I also think that when you're in ketosis for a long time, this could be to your point too. It's also a stressor to the body, which could make your body more acidic as well. So we need to balance it out with flexing. And it's interesting. I've been, and we've spoken at a lot of conferences together, keto conferences as well.
Yeah.
And several times, Anna, I've been on a panel at a low carb keto conference, and there's 5 or 6 people on the panel. I'm one of them. And these are amazing friends and colleagues of mine that are like all in with keto forever or carnivore forever. And they're all saying we all need to do keto forever. Men and women do it the same, keto forever. Or even if they don't do the same, do it forever. And I'm there saying, no, I don't agree with that. We need to flex out and have a flexible metabolism because that's another form of a metabolic prison
Right.
is only burning fat and ketones and not sugar. We want to go back and forth. So yes, that's one part there. Now, the critics are going to come out and say keto doesn't work because you can't put the keto diet, which I think is more of a metabolic process than a diet, but you can't put keto in a pill. So big pharma will have attacks saying things like ketoacidosis, and people freak out about ketoacidosis. And ketoacidosis is a dangerous state, and it's only a concern for diabetics, primarily type 1 diabetics. It's actually pretty rare even in type 2 diabetics, really mostly in type 1. That's when your blood ketones are over 15 millimoles per liter. I've never seen that. I've seen people do a 30-day fast and never reach over 10. I've gotten over 5. That's my highest. So, anyways, when it's done right, the way that I teach it, Anna teaches it, when you balance it out with feasting, it's miraculous for many of these conditions because all of these conditions have something in common: inflammation. And keto done the
Mhm.
right way lowers that inflammation.
Well, and to that point, when I was exploring this, right, I was like getting into that dogmatic, really being keto green for most of the time. But hey, I'm from a family of chefs and bakers. So I
Ooh.
love my feast days. I love my feast. But I was really strict and I was trying it out for my third book, Menu Pause, different recipes, very um, like a carnivore plan. I was trying, and plus I was on the road in Texas a lot. So I was just like, okay, just give me the steak and forget everything else. So I was on a very much carnivore plan. But then I didn't realize, and I was gaining weight. I'm like, wait, I'm in ketosis. I'm not, eating, like, what's going on? Why am I gaining weight? And it was because I was forming uric acid. So those of us with really, again, ancestral physiology or epigenetics, we form a lot of uric acid, those with PCOS, certain ethnicities, but in general, all of us may increase that uric acid if we're not really balancing and cycling and flexing so that we're not in that prison. But that's how I discovered the importance of uric acid, especially if we're, too much protein, too much keto for too long, or we're not balancing it with all the alkalinizers, the greens, especially. And carnivore for me was not good.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love that you brought up the uric acid piece. That could be an issue, especially with these extreme diets. And look, I love keto. I love carnivore. I'm actually
Mhm.
doing carnivore right now, but I don't do it for very long, and I don't teach my
Yes.
students to do it for very long. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just a tool. It's a reset. It's a way to flex in and out. I love my flex days as well. In the book, that 30-day plan, there are strategic, what I call metabolic flex days where you could actually, I want you to actually get out of ketosis and burn sugar for a day. But here's the important thing about those flex days. When you're increasing your carbs intentionally, hopefully from healthy carbs, a high carb day or a higher carb day is a low fat day. We don't want high carbs and high fat. That is not good for the metabolism. The Randall cycle will prioritize the excess glucose, and the fat will stay in your bloodstream in your body and create higher triglyceride levels, higher levels of LPS, and that's not good. So you want to be low fat on a high carb day. Protein is fine to have high on a high carb day, but fat needs to be lowered on that day.
Yeah, and I think too, and just experiencing, for this keto green for a long time is that sometimes cycling, like you said, being flexible is doing, healthy protein, healthy vegetables, and just leaving fat out for a week or two, sometimes, occasionally, just kind of like a fat flush, so to speak.
Yeah, I
So
love that idea.
that can be very, very helpful too.
I
So
bet
I
you'll
want,
slim down right away with that little tip right there. And that's weak with the low fat, you'll slim down pretty quickly.
yeah, yeah. But you have to watch out for those cravings because fat keeps craving away.
Yeah.
So
Increase the protein.
keep increasing the protein. Exactly. And so one of the things like you talk about is autophagy as a key to cellular health. Can you talk about what autophagy is and how to get there?
Yeah. It's one of the great things. One of my favorite tools is for anti-aging and stem cell production and just overall health is autophagy. I know you've spoken about autophagy before and had guests as well. Autophagy, the analogy that I give in the book on autophagy is this. It really helps people understand. Imagine a refrigerator, right? We all have a refrigerator inside of the kitchen. If we open up our refrigerator, we'll see groceries that all have an expiration date on them. They all have certain expiration dates. And imagine if you just let all of those groceries expire way beyond the expiration date, but instead of throwing those groceries, the expired groceries, into the trash, you kind of just shove them towards the back of the fridge. You open up those drawers and shove it in the drawers, close the drawer, buy new, fresh groceries and put them in front of the expired groceries and close that door and come back the next day. That's going to be a disgusting, toxic environment. I think we could all agree that disease will manifest in that environment.
Yes.
Well, the human being is like that refrigerator. We have mitochondria, cells, certain proteins that all have expiration dates on them. Autophagy is that process of getting rid of these expired groceries, expired cells, and cleaning out the junk, like Pac-Man going within your cells, cleaning out the junk. Now, autophagy is always happening in the body, but you could enhance it through fasting, through strength training. There are certain senolytics. I'm sure you have products, by the way, that have like these autophagy enhancing mechanisms, but I love it through fasting. And what happens in a fast, and the question is, okay, at what point am I getting this increase in autophagy during the fast? We don't have specific data, but I think based off of what I've seen, around the 16 to 17 hour mark of a fast, you're going to start to see an increase, or you won't see it, but there will be an increase in autophagy. Now, the more metabolically healthy you are, it could happen even sooner, but 16 to 17 hours, let's say there's an increase in this autophagy process. But here's what happens. The body is so smart. This incredible innate intelligence that God built within every cell, it's so freaking smart. The number one priority for the body is survival. So of course, when you are going without food, your body thinks, I need to survive. There's no food energy coming in. Where am I going to get energy from? Autophagy. So it activates autophagy and it looks for these cells that are inflamed, mitochondria that are not producing energy well or burning fat well, and it starts to fix it up and clean it out, if you will. Pac-Man, cleaning it out. And it goes a step farther. If the cell has no function, what's called a senescent cell, a zombie cell, the innate intelligence will actually get rid of that cell through a healthy version of cell death called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. And it'll get rid of the cell because if you don't get rid of the cell, it starts to infect other cells and it ages you faster, by the way. So it gets rid of the cell and then it produces a stem cell. Stem cells are all the rage in the anti-aging field, right? It's like people pay a lot of money for stem cells, but you could actually get free stem cells through fasting and autophagy. So I love it. I think it's an incredible process. Last thing on this point here, when you're in that fasted state, you could be conscious that I could just go to the fridge and get food, or I could just go on my phone and hit Uber Eats and get food, but your metabolism and innate intelligence doesn't understand that. we're hardwired for the old school. So it automatically goes into this process. And fasting is one of the best ways to harness this innate intelligence to activate autophagy and clean out the junk.
I agree. And it's not just the physical junk, it's the mental junk, right?
Mm,
So that's why I always say when faced with a difficult decision, I have to fast and pray. I have to
mm,
fast and pray. Often it's usually 72 hours or at least 3 days, but to really get
love
into
it.
that state, to clean out the, mental um, overload and mental garbage as
The
well as the
mental
physical
zombie cells, we'll
garbage.
call it.
Yes, mental zombie cells. Well, Ben, give us a day, like an ideal day in your life. Like,
Yeah. So I could break down most days and what it looks like for me, besides like the work aspect. I'm doing a lot of these interviews these days, but I personally skip breakfast. Now, I think it's better to have breakfast and skip dinner if you do fasting, especially for women. I know this even for
I
men.
agree.
Yeah. So I'm not practicing what I would recommend, but personally, I just feel better skipping breakfast. Now, I do technically have a light breakfast. I have coffee an hour and a half after waking up with collagen and maybe
Wait,
like an
why an hour and a half? Why are you waiting that long?
oh, because when you
Yeah,
have coffee right after you wake up, number one, you're dehydrated and coffee can make you more dehydrated. So you want to hydrate before you caffeinate. Dr. Michael Bruce just shared that with me yesterday, the American sleep doctor, but he's right. And then
I would
what
say
happens?
mighty maca before coffee for
Mighty
sure.
maca, even better. Yeah, even better. Mighty maca before coffee. What happens is when you have coffee, it has a lot of caffeine, of course.
Mm.
And when you wake up first thing in the morning, your cortisol levels are already high. They're elevated in the morning, which is natural. It's going to get you going. When you have coffee with a ton of caffeine with high cortisol, you're not going to really get your biggest bang for your buck from that coffee because the cortisol is just it's way more powerful than the caffeine. So what ends up happening is you want more coffee later on in the day. You get a second cup, a third cup, and you're relying on stimulants the rest of the day. But when you wait an hour and a half after waking up, cortisol levels drop, or have mighty maca instead. Cortisol levels drop, and then you could have your cup of coffee if you want to have your cup of coffee or switch to the mighty maca. But it's important to wait those 90 minutes. I do that every single morning. It makes a
Yeah,
big
I love
difference for
that.
me. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Um, even before that, I have my a gratitude journal. I write down my goals. I don't look at my phone. So I'm always doing that, gratitude journaling, writing down my goals. I come in my office here and I have three different vision boards and I read the affirmations and I have the red light on. So I have a whole process that I do all the time
Mm.
before I turn on the computer, before I look at my phone. And then I walk my dog as the sun rises and I do affirmations in my head as I walk my dog. And then I come home and do the coffee. And the coffee has collagen. It has maybe some fat in it. I take my supplements and then I get into my office and I start getting into my groove. I work out usually around 11 a.m., 12 p.m., so midday in my garage gym. And then I'll do usually a sauna after I work out or a cold plunge before I work out. And then I usually have my first big meal around noon, right after the workout. And it's usually protein and fat, like steak and eggs or chicken wings or something of that nature. And then I go back to work and then I'll have another meal around 5 or 6 p.m. So I typically have two really big meals and just like a coffee with collagen protein powder in the morning.
That's great. Okay, so with your intermittent fasting, you're not eating like those 8-hour windows because I know there were a lot of people that said, "Oh, well, I'm fasting for 16 hours, but I'm eating all of the 8 hours." I mean, ridiculous.
No, yeah,
Yeah,
no, I don't
good.
do that. I'll eat usually within like a 6 or 7 hour window, but it's usually just
Two
two
meals.
really two meals with like 80 grams of protein at each meal. So I'm getting a substantial amount of protein at each of those meals.
80 grams. Okay, what does 80 grams of protein per meal look like? So you had steak and eggs for breakfast and then
Yeah, let me actually do this on my app here. Because I think 16 ounces of like a ribeye is about, I think that's about 80 grams of protein. So let me fact check this with you and give you an idea. Because sometimes I'll just have a 16-ounce ribeye, and I think that's about 80 grams of protein. So here we go, ribeye steak. Let's do 16 ounces. That is, yeah, 89 grams of protein. Yeah, and I could easily crush a ribeye steak that's 16 ounces. So that's what I typically do, something like that.
amazing, amazing. Okay. So tell us where we can get your book and follow you and your amazing YouTube channel and everything you got going on, Ben.
Yeah, Anna, thank you. And I think, with the book, chapter 10, I got to say this, my favorite chapter in the book. I might write an entire book just based off of chapter 10. I probably will. It's all about how your thoughts influence your health and metabolism and longevity. It talks about the placebo effect, the nocebo effect, your self-image, how you view yourself, the longevity science on purpose and living on purpose with your purpose. Vitamin G supplementation, which is should I reveal what it is? Do you
Oh,
think the audience knows?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is gratitude, the feeling of gratitude. It produces Anna's favorite hormone, oxytocin, right away. So if you are like me, sometimes I'll buy a book because I just like the person and I want to support them. But sometimes I don't read the entire book. If that's you, please at least read chapter 10 or
Mhm.
listen to chapter 10. The book's on Audible, hardcover, Kindle. I'd love for you to read the whole book, but if you're going to choose one chapter, chapter 10, you might read it and be so inspired to read the whole book. It's really an incredible chapter. And then there's a 30-day plan for you to follow if you're a beginner or somebody who's advanced with fat burning recipes. So we have a special offer. If you buy the book over at metabolicfreedombook.com, we are going to give you an entire course that I built out on the metabolism, which is free. 12 lessons here, me in my studio, teaching you about the metabolism. And then we have exclusive interviews in that course with Dr. Daniel Pompa, Gary Brecka, Dr. Jason Fung, Cynthia Thurlow, who's our dear friend, and Megan Ramos, which all of that's for free. When you go to metabolicfreedombook.com, you'll buy the book, put your name, email, order number, and you'll be automatically sent those free gifts.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I know it's going to be good. And the one thing is that that's what I always loved about you, Ben, is that you put your heart into it and you really focus on, like for your chapter 10, it's about purposeful living, right? And having that joy and that connection and relationships, because we know at the end of the day, that's what matters most. We want to be healthy and happy in our body. And before we close, I did ask you before we get started, I said, I want you to talk about this. Can you be 10, 20 pounds overweight and still be very, very healthy? And can you be your ideal body weight and be unhealthy?
The answer is yes and yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes and yes. First of all, let's address the first question. Can you be 10 to 20 pounds overweight and still be considered healthy? Yes, because number one, it depends on where the fat is located, right? We know that if we have more visceral fat, which is organ fat, that's a problem. That increases inflammation and shortens your lifespan. But you could have 10 to 20 pounds of extra weight and it being predominantly subcutaneous fat, which is healthy, totally healthy. And then you could be the opposite and be very lean and think you're healthy because you look lean and maybe on the scale you're slim, but have a ton of visceral fat. They're called TOFIs, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. I would argue that that lean, skinny person that has more organ fat is going to age faster and create more metabolic disease than the person that's 10 to 20 pounds overweight with less organ fat. So it's not about the number on the scale. It's about body fat percentage, about muscle muscle percentage, excuse me, total muscle, and your visceral fat. So go get your visceral fat tested because that's a very important marker. But I want to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with me? Do you
No,
disagree? What are your thoughts?
absolutely,
Okay.
100%. And there are some things like the InBody that can measure
Yeah.
visceral fat versus subcutaneous fat. So different types of testing now. And also the body spec scan. That's another
Yeah.
really good one to measure visceral fat versus body fat. What other devices are you using?
Those are good and convenient, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to be 100% accurate like the InBody, but it gives you like a baseline and gives you trends. So I definitely recommend it. I have an InBody here. The spec scan do you have to go to a clinic for the second one you
Yeah,
mentioned?
yeah, it's a DEXA scan
Okay,
basically,
got it.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
That one, I think they've gone to like Hack Your Health and KetoCon. I think I've seen them. That's good
Yeah.
too. The most accurate way, I learned about this from Dr. Sean O'Mara, my good friend, is it's actually an MRI test where you actually go into an MRI, it's a scan, and it's the most accurate because it shows you a visual of the body, the visceral fat that you have versus a number, and that is more impactful than a number.
Oh
The
yeah.
challenge with that is that insurance doesn't cover it. In some states, they're like $500 or 1,000. So that's the drawback. But InBody is just fine if you don't want to invest in that and go to a clinic. InBody gives you trends. It's a good idea.
Yeah, and many gyms, et cetera, have that now. All right,
There
so
you go.
tell our audience where they can find you. So they're going to go to metabolicfreedombook.com.
Yes. Yeah, that's where you get the book and the free bonuses. My main website is benazadi.com. I have my Metabolic Freedom podcast Anna has been a guest at least twice, maybe 3 times, but we just recorded in Miami and that's going to come out soon. It was absolutely brilliant. So benazadi.com, metabolicfreedombook.com, and then Metabolic Freedom Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ben, for being here. All
Thank you,
right,
Annie.
to all our listeners, there's so much actionable items that you can do, that you can take right now based on what Ben and I have been talking about and what you've learned today. Remember, it's always just one next right step at a time. So one of those next right steps, go to metabolicfreedombook.com and get his book, Chapter 10, you guys, Chapter 10. So you will enjoy it for sure. Thank you all for being here. I look forward to your comments, questions, and always your feedback. Till next time on the Girlfriend Doctor Show, this is Dr. Anna Cabeca.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Girlfriend Doctor podcast. Check out all the links below for more.